I now give the floor to the distinguished permanent representative of Israel.
Mr. President, every year on this date, this chamber holds the same cynical Israel-bashing festival. Every year, we hear speaker after speaker distorting history and promoting a completely one-sided narrative. Every year, member states pass the same empty resolutions, and this year is no different. Let no one be fooled. None of this does anything to help the Palestinian people. It only continues to feed the Palestinian culture of victimhood. The reality is that this debate on the so-called question of Palestine avoids the hard questions. Are the Palestinians really ready to make the hard decisions needed for peace? Do they really want to end the conflict, to end the decades of terror and violence against the people of Israel, and to end the diplomatic warfare here in the UN? For all the talk about new initiatives and new resolutions, we must ask the question, do the Palestinians even want a state? History tells us that the answer is no. Since 1947, the Palestinian leadership has proven time and time again that they don't want a solution. Let's remember what happened on that day, 69 years ago. The United Nations voted to partition the land into a Jewish state and an Arab state. We all know what happened next. The Jews said yes. The Arabs said no. Simple as that. And today, nothing has changed. After 69 years, the Palestinians still don't want peace. They still don't want a state, and they still don't want to end the conflict. Every time there is a possibility for progress, every time there is an opportunity to choose a better path for their people, they choose the path of violence, rejection, and bloodshed. Mr. President, let us not forget that the leaders of the Zionist movement accepted the UN plan, despite all the risks, despite the threats of genocide against the Jewish people by Arab leaders. These brave leaders accepted the plan because they knew it offered the best hope for the restoration of Jewish independence after 2,000 years, and because they believed it was possible to live side by side with our Arab neighbors in the land of our forefathers. But the Arab leadership was not willing to accept the Jewish state under any conditions. Make no mistake, this was not about pushing for a better deal. A working paper of the UN Secretariat from July 1949 stated clearly, and I quote, "The Arabs rejected the United Nations partition plan in its entirety. Their goal was clear. This was not about establishing another Arab state. It was and remains about opposition to a homeland for the Jewish people." Just look at the headlines the day after the vote. Assembly votes Palestine partition, Arabs walk out, disavow any partition wall. This is the whole story. They rejected the plan and launched a war of destruction, joined by the armies of 5 Arab nations. The response was best summed up by the Secretary General of the Arab League, Azam Pasha. He promised, and I quote, "It will be a war of elimination. It will be a momentous massacre in history that will be talked about like the massacres of the Mongols or the Crusades." This has repeated itself at every stage of history. Israel makes compromises for peace. The Palestinians reject every offer and every plan and respond with a wave of violence and terror. From 1948 until 1967, when the territory that we all talk about was under Arab control, the residents did not go to the international forums, and the Arab states didn't lift a finger to create one. The founding charter of the PLO does not call for a Palestinian state. It calls on Arabs, and I quote, to repulse the Zionist invasion and to eliminate the Zionist presence from Palestine. Let me read this again. To repulse the Zionist invasion and to eliminate the Zionist presence from Palestine. In 1967, Israel was attacked again on 3 sides, but defeated 3 Arab armies. Again, we extended our hand to our neighbors, appealing to them to end the conflict, to end the bloodshed, to end the suffering on both sides, once and for all. The Arab world responded with one unequivocal message of rejection: no peace, no recognition, no negotiation. Mr. President, the history of Palestinian rejectionism is alive and well today. In the year 2000, Israel's Prime Minister, Ehud Barak, made an unprecedented and far-reaching offer for a Palestinian state. Believe me, this was very controversial in Israel. It involved very painful compromises on our part. But still, the Palestinian leadership, led by Yasser Arafat, said no. President Clinton urged him to change his mind. Many Arab leaders told him this was a golden opportunity to establish a state. But he refused. And not only did he say no, he encouraged the wave of terror and violence that has not ended to this very day. President Clinton called the decision to reject a state, quote, an error of historic proportions. But the Palestinians repeated this mistake 8 years later. Once again, another Israeli leader, Prime Minister Olmert, he offered the Palestinians everything they claimed to want: a state of their own, virtually all the territory in dispute, and the uprooting of the so-called settlements. What was their response? President Abbas said, and I quote, "I did not agree. I rejected it out of hand." How many times should we be shocked when the Palestinians won't even consider the most generous offers? How many times do we have to hear no until we believe it? Every time there was an opportunity to move forward, to chart a path to a better future, the Palestinian leadership rejected it. Israel has tried everything. In 2005, we dismantled entire communities and uprooted thousands of people from their homes in the Gaza Strip. And also, may I remind you, from parts of Judea and Samaria as well. This was a chance for the Palestinians to prove that their goal was the welfare of their people rather than warfare with Israel. This was an opportunity for the Palestinian leadership, and they threw it away. Instead of building hospitals in Gaza, schools. Instead of investing in the future of their people, Gaza became a launching pad to attack Israeli towns and cities with rockets from above and tunnels from below. Once again, Israel opened the door to peace, and the Palestinians slammed it shut. To this day, the Palestinians refuse to assume control over the Gaza border crossings. The Palestinian leadership won't even take responsibility for the territory and the people they claim to represent, because responsibility requires accountability. It requires a practical policy of action. It means saying no to excuses, but making excuses is the policy of the Palestinian. Just think about one of the great lies that unfortunately many in this chamber repeat endlessly. Time and time again we hear that settlements are the obstacle to progress. But in 2010, for 10 months, we put a complete freeze on settlement building as a goodwill gesture to advance talks. For 10 months, not a single apartment or kindergarten or community center was built in Judea and Samaria. That's a fact. And the Palestinians still refuse to even come to the table. That's also a fact. It's not about settlements. It never was. The Palestinian rejection began before there was a single settlement, and it will continue despite every effort to move forward. In 2014, US Secretary of State John Kerry led another round of talks. The government of Israel offered deep concessions and got nothing in return from the Palestinians. We took difficult decisions and even released Palestinian prisoners who had murdered innocent Israelis. Just think about it. Just imagine the pain felt by Israelis when they watched these terrorists receive a hero's welcome from President Abbas. But then, just as the deadline was about to pass, the PA blew up the process by establishing a unity government with Hamas, the internationally recognized terror organization. The PA faced an important decision: to talk peace with Israel or join forces with a terror organization. And they chose terror. Another missed opportunity, another rejection, another embrace of the forces of violence. Mr. President, Israel has tried everything, time after time, more compromises and more concessions, but the Palestinians always had an excuse. There was always something missing, always some reason not to sit down and talk with us. Ask yourself, if the Palestinians really want peace, why do they reject every opportunity? If they really wanted peace, they would have answered Prime Minister Barak and Prime Minister Olmert's far-reaching proposals. And right now, today, they can answer Prime Minister Netanyahu's open call for negotiations anytime, any place, in New York, in Jerusalem, in Ramallah. Instead, they focus their time and effort on the political theater we are witnessing here today. Empty resolutions and empty speeches, more promises of support, more new initiatives, more UN organizations, and of course, more funding. The PA pays lip service to these initiatives because it pays well. According to the World Bank, they received $2.5 billion in international aid in 2014 and $21.7 billion in development aid since the Oslo Accords were signed in 1993. According to the 2016 Global Humanitarian Assistance Report, the Palestinians have been among the top 10 recipients of international funding for over a decade, and they receive 10 times more humanitarian aid per capita than any other people. Year after year, the international community pours billions of dollars into the PA, an organization which is corrupt from top to bottom. Are we surprised when the money intended to improve the lives of the Palestinian people goes instead to the families and the inner circles of the Palestinian leaders? But it is not just about widespread corruption. Palestinian leadership allocates tens of millions of dollars to finance the Palestinian terror industry. In 2012, the PA paid over $75 million to terrorists in Israeli prisons and $78 million to the families of terrorists, including suicide bombers. Together, this accounts for over 16% of the annual foreign donations and grants to the PA budget. They try to hide this subsidizing of terror by shifting responsibility to the PLO, but it all comes from the same source and it all goes for the same purpose: to encourage the murder of innocent Jews. Taxpayers around the world should know that their money is helping to fund stabbings, shootings, and suicide bombings. This is where the funding goes, not to building institutions, but to paying PA salaries, to the black hole of the PA corruption, and to paychecks for terrorists. The Palestinians are on permanent welfare provided by the international community, and they have no intention of stopping it. They want the conflict to continue because they know that others will continue to pay their bills, and institutions like this one will continue to conduct a campaign against Israel on their behalf. The Palestinians don't want an agreement. They don't want a state. The responsibilities of statehood would mean making hard choices and delivering on their promises to their people. It would mean investing in their own institutions. It would mean putting an end to terror and incitement. It would mean finally recognizing the connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. It would mean making peace. But the Palestinians want easy victories without the responsibilities of governing, and they know the only way is to continue the conflict. Mr. President, it's time to put an end to this lie, once and for all. If the Palestinians really wanted peace, we could have had peace. The real goal of the Palestinian Authority is to continue to exist as a corrupt entity, living off the goodwill of the international community. For 69 years, the Palestinians have said no to every offer, to every compromise, to every chance for peace. But the more the Palestinians say no, the more the international community says yes. If you really want to show solidarity with the Palestinian people, then end this charade. Shut down the grievance industry and the culture of victimhood. Stop the endless stream of resolutions which do nothing to promote peace or help the Palestinian people. And most importantly, condemn the culture of hate and incitement and demand that the Palestinian leaders finally return to the negotiating table. Until this moment comes, Israel will continue to stand strong in defense of our country, and the people of Israel will continue to pray for a true and lasting peace. Thank you, Mr. President.
And I thank the distinguished representative of Israel.